There's a moment that happens quietly to a lot of people in their early 30s. It usually arrives late at night scrolling through your phone. You see a former classmate buy a house, someone else announce a promotion, another post about a startup exit or a big move to a new city, and suddenly, without warning, a thought lands heavy in your chest. I'm behind. Here's what's interesting about that feeling. It rarely comes from your own life. It comes from watching fragments of other people's lives stitched together into a story your brain insists is complete. I know someone who turned 32 and felt exactly this way. Stable job, decent income, no major mistakes. But he couldn't shake the sense that he'd missed something, that everyone else had figured out the rules while he was still guessing. He wasn't struggling, but he wasn't satisfied either, and the anxiety wasn't loud. It was quiet and constant, which made it harder to ignore. This is where our story begins, not with bad decisions, but with distorted comparisons. The first idea is simple but uncomfortable. Feeling behind financially at 30 is usually a comparison problem, not a money problem. Think about it this way. You're comparing your full, messy, uncertain life to other people's highlight reels, their best moments versus your entire process. What looks like confidence on the outside often hides stress, debt, fear, or pressure you can't see. Here's the paradox. The more connected we are, the easier it is to feel isolated in progress. Psychologically, this makes sense. Humans evolved in small groups where comparison was useful. You knew who had food, who had skills, who had status. Today, that instinct is exposed to thousands of reference points instead of a few dozen. Our brains haven't adapted to that scale. Historically, this is new. 100 years ago, your financial comparison group was your neighborhood, maybe your family. Today, it's everyone you've ever met, plus millions you've never met. Same psychology, radically different input. Nobody's crazy for feeling behind. It's a normal reaction to an abnormal environment. But here's the invisible part. Most financial success stories you admire required trade-offs you might not want. Long hours, relocations, risk tolerance, stress, delayed enjoyment. You're not just seeing what they gained. You're not seeing what they gave up. Which brings us to the second idea. Being behind often means you chose different priorities, not worse ones. I know people who optimized aggressively for career growth in their 20s and feel burned out by 35. I also know people who prioritize flexibility, relationships, or mental health early on and feel financially slower, but emotionally steadier. Neither path is wrong, but comparison erases context. Here's what's interesting about that. We tend to judge our progress by external milestones, even when those milestones don't align with what we actually value. Marriage by a certain age, homeownership by a certain age, income by a certain age. These timelines feel official, but they're mostly cultural artifacts. They shift across generations and economies. In the 1950s, stability meant staying put. Today, stability often means adaptability. Same word, different meaning. The paradox is this. Chasing someone else's timeline can delay your own progress. Psychologically, timelines create urgency. Urgency narrows thinking. When you feel late, you rush. And rush decisions in money rarely end well. This is why people take jobs they hate because they should be further along. Why they invest aggressively to catch up. Why they stretch lifestyles before foundations are ready. Nobody's reckless on purpose. They're responding to pressure. The invisible cost of feeling behind is impatience. And impatience is one of the most expensive emotions in finance. Which leads to the third idea. Progress in your 30s is less about speed and more about direction. Think about compound growth. Its magic isn't early wins, it's durability. The ability to keep going without being knocked out of the game. There's a story about two friends who started earning serious money around the same time. One immediately upgraded everything: apartment, car, travel, lifestyle. It looked like success. The other kept life mostly the same and quietly built flexibility. Emergency savings, optionality, time. 10 years later, the second friend looked ahead, even though nothing dramatic ever happened. Here's the paradox. The most powerful financial moves in your 30s often feel boring. They don't produce applause. They don't create dramatic before and after moments. They create resilience. Psychologically, boring progress is hard to appreciate because it doesn't trigger emotion. There's no spike of excitement, no external validation, just quiet stability. But that stability compounds into confidence, and confidence compounds into better decisions. The invisible part is that money isn't just a tool for buying things, it's a tool for buying time, patience, and margin for error. Those things matter more as life gets complex. Careers zig instead of zag. Health surprises happen. Relationships change. Opportunities appear unexpectedly. The people who feel ahead later in life are often the ones who built room for those surprises early. I struggle with this too. It's hard not to wonder if you should be doing more, earning more, optimizing harder, especially when everyone else seems to be accelerating. But here's what helps: asking a different question. Instead of am I behind, try am I building something I can stick with? Because the real risk in your 30s isn't being behind. It's panicking into a path that looks impressive but isn't sustainable. Let's pause here. So far, we've talked about comparison, timelines, and patience, about how feeling behind is often a signal, not a verdict, a signal that you're measuring yourself with someone else's ruler. In the next section, we'll go deeper. We'll talk about why early financial struggles don't predict long-term outcomes nearly as much as people think, and how the stories we tell ourselves at 30 quietly shape the rest of our financial lives. For now, just sit with this thought: being behind is only dangerous if it makes you rush, and rushing is optional. There's a story about a woman who spent most of her 20s feeling like she was constantly resetting. She changed careers twice, moved cities more than she could count, watched friends settle into paths that looked stable while hers felt scattered. By the time she turned 30, she had less savings than she hoped, and no clear label for what she was building. She felt behind. What's interesting is what happened next. Over the following decade, those resets became her advantage. Each move taught her something. Each misstep narrowed what she didn't want. When the right opportunity finally appeared, she recognized it faster than others because she had lived through enough false starts to know the difference. This brings us to the fourth idea. Early financial instability does not predict long-term failure nearly as much as people assume. We tend to treat our 20s and early 30s like a scoreboard. Whoever has the highest income, the clearest title, the most visible assets must be winning. But that's a misunderstanding of how long games work. Think about it this way. Most careers that look linear in hindsight were anything but in real time. They zigzagged, paused, reversed, restarted. The story only looks smooth once you know how it ends. Historically, this pattern is everywhere. Many of the people we now describe as overnight successes spent years drifting, experimenting, or recovering from the stakes. Different era, same psychology. The uncertainty felt just as heavy then as it does now. Here's the paradox. Feeling behind can be a sign that you're still exploring. And exploration is uncomfortable precisely because it hasn't paid off yet. Psychologically, humans crave closure. We want to know where things are going. Open loops create anxiety. So when your finances or career don't fit a neat narrative by 30, your brain interprets that as danger. But wisdom often arrives through unfinished chapters. The invisible part is that flexibility is a form of wealth. Not the kind you can point to, but the kind that adapts when conditions change. People who lock into rigid paths early may gain speed, but they often lose maneuverability, which leads to the fifth idea. The story you tell yourself about being behind can quietly become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Here's what's interesting about narratives. They don't just describe reality, they shape behavior. If you believe you're behind, you're more likely to chase outcomes instead of building foundations. You may take risks that don't fit your temperament. You may overextend to catch up. You may ignore warning signs because stopping feels like falling further back. Nobody's crazy for doing this. When people feel late, urgency feels justified. But here's the twist. Many financial disasters don't start with greed. They start with insecurity. I've seen this play out in subtle ways. People investing in things they don't understand because they feel time pressure, taking on debt to signal progress, saying yes to stress-heavy roles because they feel they owe the future something. The paradox is this. Trying to erase the feeling of being behind often pushes people further behind. Psychologically, insecurity narrows focus. It shifts attention from long-term consistency to short-term relief. And money decisions made for emotional relief rarely age well. The invisible cost isn't just financial, it's mental. Constantly feeling late turns every decision into a referendum on your worth. That's exhausting. Wise progress reframes the question. Instead of asking, how do I catch up? It asks, what kind of pace can I sustain? Because sustainable progress compounds. Forced progress fractures. There's a difference between speed and direction. Speed impresses. Direction endures. This is especially important in your 30s because life starts adding weight, responsibilities grow, energy changes, priorities shift. The strategies that worked in your 20s may no longer fit who you are becoming. Here's the paradox. The people who look slow at 30 often look unstoppable at 50. Not because they were smarter, but because they learned how to align decisions with who they actually are, not who they thought they should be. I struggle with this too. It's hard not to narrate your life in comparison to others. Hard not to wonder if you missed a window. Hard not to feel pressure when milestones loom. Understanding this doesn't eliminate the feeling, but it gives it context. Feeling behind is not a diagnosis. It's feedback. And feedback can be interpreted in different ways. You can treat it as a warning that you're failing, or you can treat it as a signal to clarify what progress actually means to you. That shift matters, because once you stop trying to win someone else's race, your decisions calm down. Your time horizon lengthens. Your confidence becomes quieter but sturdier. Let's pause again. So far, we've talked about comparison, timelines, exploration, and the stories we tell ourselves. About how early instability can be fertile ground and how insecurity often masquerades as urgency. In the final section, we'll bring this together. We'll talk about what actually helps people feel ahead later in life, why peace often arrives after clarity, and how redefining success in your 30s can quietly change everything that comes after. For now, hold on to this idea. Being behind is not a failure of progress. It's often a sign that your story is still being written. There's a story about a man who at 32 felt like he had missed every important financial milestone. He didn't own a home. His savings were modest. His career looked respectable but not exceptional. On paper, nothing was wrong. Emotionally, everything felt late. What changed his trajectory wasn't a dramatic raise or a lucky investment. It was a shift in how he defined progress. Instead of asking whether he was ahead or behind, he started asking a quieter question. What actually makes people financially secure over a lifetime? That question brings us to the sixth idea. The most powerful financial advantage in your 30s is not speed, it's resilience. Here's what's interesting about resilience. It rarely looks impressive in the moment. It shows up as boring decisions, margin for error, and saying no to things that stretch you too thin. None of those generate applause, but they quietly prevent disasters. Historically, this has always been true. The people who endured wars, depressions, technological shifts, and industry collapses weren't the ones who optimized for peak outcomes. They were the ones who avoided irreversible mistakes. What looks like success in your 30s often hides fragility. High income paired with high stress, rapid progress paired with no buffer, momentum built on assumptions that nothing will go wrong. Here's the paradox. The goal is not to avoid risk, it's to avoid ruin. Psychologically, this matters because humans are terrible at estimating how much bad luck they can withstand. We assume tomorrow will look like today. We plan around averages, not extremes. But financial disasters live in the extremes. Wise people don't assume they'll avoid bad luck. They assume it will happen eventually and plan accordingly. The invisible wealth here is slack. Extra time, extra cash, extra emotional bandwidth. Slack looks inefficient, but it's what turns shocks into inconveniences instead of catastrophes. If you feel behind at 30, building resilience is one of the fastest ways to feel ahead later. Not because it accelerates outcomes, but because it stabilizes them. Which leads to the seventh and final idea. Feeling ahead financially has less to do with numbers and more to do with alignment. Alignment between what you earn and how you live, between your goals and your temperament, between your plans and your patience. Here's what nobody talks about. Many people who catch up financially never feel better. They just move the finish line. The anxiety that pushed them forward stays with them, just dressed in nicer clothes. The paradox is this: you don't stop feeling behind when you hit a number. You stop feeling behind when your money decisions stop fighting your values. Think about what people actually want when they say they want to be ahead. They want safety. They want options. They want the freedom to make choices without panic. They want to feel like one mistake won't undo their life. Those are emotional goals, not numerical ones. And the invisible part is that those goals are often achievable long before traditional milestones are met. I've seen people with average incomes and modest savings feel calm and in control because their lives were designed around flexibility. I've seen others with impressive balance sheets feel trapped because every dollar came with obligations. Nobody's wrong here. We're all responding to our own histories, past scarcity, family expectations, social pressure. Money is never just money. Understanding that doesn't make the pressure disappear, but it changes how you respond to it. Instead of asking, "Why am I behind?" you start asking, "Behind according to whom?" Instead of asking, "How fast can I grow?" you ask, "What pace lets me sleep at night?" Instead of asking, "What should I have by now?" you ask, "What kind of life am I trying to build?" Those questions are slower, quieter, less competitive, but they're also more durable. I struggle with this too. There are moments when comparison sneaks in, when someone else's progress makes my own feel smaller, when timelines feel loud. But perspective helps. It reminds me that most financial journeys are long, uneven, and invisible, that the parts worth having often take longer than we expect, and that rushing through the early chapters rarely improves the ending. Let's come full circle. At the beginning, we talked about feeling behind at 30, about the quiet panic that can creep in when your life doesn't match the script you absorbed growing up. Here's the reframe. Being behind is not evidence that you failed. It's evidence that you're human in a world that sells unrealistic timelines. Money compounds, careers compound, self-knowledge compounds, but none of them do so smoothly. The people who do best over time aren't the ones who peaked early. They're the ones who stayed adaptable, avoided ruin, and aligned their decisions with who they actually are. If this changed how you see your own situation, don't rush to fix anything. Just notice. Notice where comparison is driving your stress. Notice where urgency is distorting your choices. Notice where resilience might matter more than acceleration. Because the real advantage in your 30s is not having everything figured out. It's giving yourself enough room to figure it out without breaking along the way. And that's not being behind. That's playing the long game.